There was a time when RTS and other strategy games were the envy of the world. A time when if you had a blockbuster movie franchise, you better have made an RTS version as well. The RTS genre of my youth was near all-encompassing, featuring legendary titles of not just games like Command & Conquer Generals, with its wacky but fun approach to a post-Iraq War American mentality, but something for every age in the Battle for Middle-earth series and Star Wars Empire at War. Of course, we had the ever-present Warcraft 3, Age of Empires 3, the dawn of Company of Heroes, the Supreme Commander series, every one of which changed up the genre in different ways and brought their own fun spin on things. It was a good time to be an RTS gamer back in the early and mid-2000s, and as a kid back then, you could only dream of what the future would look like. But at some point toward the 2010s, something happened. Game developers began moving away from the genre. There were no or extremely few new blockbuster RTS games making themselves known, and those who had already dominated the genre kinda just disappeared. There was no Star Wars Empire at War 2, and once the new Star Wars trilogy came out, no game series followed. Its developer, Petroglyph, only truly returned to the stage with the Great War Western Front as late as March 2023, and in a very different package. As the Lord of the Rings movie franchise ended, the game series saw no revitalization following the Hobbit series, and nothing was announced alongside the Rings of Power TV series either. For all intents and purposes, the Command & Conquer series kinda just died out, despite its popular Red Alert series doing really well back in the day. Regardless of its massive popularity, there was no Warcraft 4, with Blizzard instead turning to other genres, focusing on fast-paced online gaming. Although I suppose they made StarCraft 2, which still has a dedicated audience, but it's by now over a decade old. The game World in Conflict, which felt like a large-scale cinematic take on Company of Heroes, apparently sold well but never received a sequel either. Indeed, despite the omnipresence and popularity of the genre once upon a time, it kinda just disappeared, without any real reason for it, other than perhaps the fact that the RTS genre kind of, at some level, morphed into the MOBA genre, which shares certain similar themes and gameplay styles. I think in many ways, even though AAA studios like Creative Assembly, the then up-and-coming Paradox Game Studios, and Firaxis of Civilization fame continued to create popular strategy games during this era, these are very different from the classic RTS genre. And for most intents and purposes, RTS kind of faded into irrelevancy. But something has happened in the last few years. Game developers have returned to the RTS genre in a number of ways, and now from a vast number of places. Sure, we have heavy hitters like Warcraft 3 Reforged, which was a mangled remaster at least on launch, and we have the comeback of legendary franchises like Age of Empires and Company of Heroes, with AoE 4 releasing in 2021 after a decade of no new games in the franchise, and Company of Heroes 3 also releasing a virtual decade after the last game in that series. Apart from these new games, Ensemble Studios have also come out with remasters or borderline remakes of older titles like AoE 1-3 and the newly released Age of Mythology Retold, all of which aims to bring back the nostalgia and old school greatness of the genre to an old and new audience. But what's more is that this time, most of the RTS and strategy innovation isn't necessarily coming from the AAA studios, but from developers trying out new ideas, and importantly, from indie studios trying to make their mark and revitalize the genre. And the best part is that they come in so many different shapes and sizes. Line War is innovative and fast-paced with a zoomed-out perspective, where you build factories, draw lines, and then tell your tanks and aircraft where to go. It's not only charming looking, but it's so addicting and truly scratches that instant action, easy to get into but tougher to master feel. We have Diplomacy is Not an Option, which finally came out after a long early access period, an RTS castle defense-like game which is super fun and unique, and next year we're getting Age of Respair, a newly announced castle defender with a bit more of a realistic look to it. But then we have the more classic Warcraft and StarCraft-like experiences too, but from developers willing to try new things. Arcane Wilds is a brand new RTS game with a unique take on recruitment, resource gathering, mission selection, and long-term base building, where you actually build up an HQ and then take your units and acquire tech back to the battle maps. Godsworn 2 harkens back to these good old RTS days, with extremely charming visuals and a unique setting bringing in a mythology-inspired Baltic Crusades. And of course, we have other fun ideas too, like Toy Tactics, a history-inspired game that's complete strategy mixed with mayhem. Starship Trooper Terran Command gives you that entire universe in a detailed and cool package with some insane and intense battles. Ancestors Legacy from a few years back, another history-inspired game, and Sins of a Solar Empire 2, the return of that series where the first game is also rather old by now. The RTS genre does indeed contain many genres or types of gameplay within it, but they all have in common that layer of tactics, of varying intricate mechanics, and the importance of thinking ahead. I think it's a great sign that more developers are returning to the RTS genre, because it is a truly captivating one, yet one that for some reason was mostly abandoned for the better part of a decade. I will, however, make one important point, because while the devs have returned, indie devs are usually the ones who innovate in this space, who bring fresh new ideas, settings, and approaches to this genre. And even though it is a good thing that, say, Microsoft through Ensemble Studios have brought the Age of Empires series back, and that Relic finally released Company of Heroes 3, the thing is, none of these games, despite probably being backed by more money than any indie dev could hope for, felt new and fresh, and failed to bring back the RTS genre in a new era. Because that is what the first iterations of these games did in a lot of ways, whether we are talking the wildly successful AoE 2, the daring AoE 3, or the first Company of Heroes. And the reason why I say that is because games like AoE 4 and Company of Heroes 3, rather than trying out something completely new in their core gameplay, chose instead to harken back to what people already know. I realize that a lot of people love Age of Empires 4, but I think even the community player numbers would agree with me. At the time of writing, the Steam store shows how Age of Empires 4 only numbers a player count below 12,000, while Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition, which is little more than a 4K remaster and reskin with some quality of life changes, numbers above 17,000. And that's a 20-year-old game at heart. Similarly, Company of Heroes 3 has just below 3,000 people playing at time of writing, while Company of Heroes 2 has just over 4,000. Now, even though AoE 2 is a popular game, it's also so old by now, over 20 years, and Company of Heroes 2 is more than 10 years old, and yet they both surpassed their new and Chinese siblings in popularity. This is kind of crazy actually, because you would expect a brand new title in a series which hasn't been updated for a generation would perform better than the last title. But this is where the innovation comes in. Why would you play a new game who's mostly dedicated to replicating what's already been done when you could just continue playing what you already know and love, and which is likely to already have a dedicated community built over the course of years and years, and frankly, games which probably run a lot better than their latest titles too. I think indie devs can do a lot for the RTS genre, and they already are, frankly. Whether we are talking something as classically inspired as Arcane Wilds or Godsworn, or something that mixes and matches city building with RTS like Manor Lords does. But I think if the AAA studios want to make money on this genre, and if we wish to see a true comeback, then the bigger companies actually need to innovate too, and they desperately need to dare to think new, and not just endlessly reboot or attempt to bring back the good old glory days in the series where the old days are still very much around. I think the RTS genre is back in many ways, but I still believe the AAA studios have a lot more work to do before we can talk about them having anything to do with it. Let me know your thoughts on this video and what I've said. Let me know which RTS games you're loving these days or what you want to see make a return, and remember to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Make sure to also follow my link below for massive savings on instant gaming. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!